Hello and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm doing a bit of an audiobook wrap up for everything I've listened to in the second half of 2025. I did one early on in the year for everything I listened to at the beginning of the year. Didn't get many views, I think it got 5. We won't talk about that. Let's see if this one does any better. Probably not. Going forwards, I'm probably just going to include the audiobooks I listen to into my monthly wrap ups now that I'm doing those. Because recalling like what I listened to in June, it's December. It's been a while. So this will be the last one of these like 6 monthly wrap ups. So don't worry, if this isn't your thing, just fob it off. Can you tell I've been batch filming and it's the end of the year? Anyway, let's rewind the clock to June when I listened to Butter by someone I can't remember because it was 6 months ago. This is the very popular Japanese book. It's got the yellow cover with the cow on it and the blood. And it's based on a true story. It's based on a serial killer in Japan. We won't get into it because I don't remember lots about the real case. But in this book, we have this serial killer called Manako Kaji, and we have this main character who I can't remember the name of, who I think is a journalist, and she's interviewing Manako Kaji and trying to like get under her skin, get to know her a bit better, and find out if she committed these murders and why, what her motivations were. This book is not to be read if you've got an eating disorder. It's quite an in-depth illustration of the Japanese kind of toxic culture around weight, weight loss, weight gain. Our main character, Nika, I think that's her name, she is quite obsessed with her weight. She talks about being only 55 kilograms at the beginning of the novel, which is quite light, but I guess she's quite small and slight. And she kind of talks about this culture of convenience food, convenience eating. She goes to meet Manako Kaji and remarks about how plump and overweight she is at about well over 70 kilograms, which, by the way, is kind of my weight. I guess maybe if she's a short person, which I also am, maybe she looks chubbier than she is. But I think it's probably to do with the toxic culture in Japan. I think it's very similar to the toxic culture we had in the noughties, where being fat or being chubby was like the worst thing you could be. And stories like Bridget Jones's Diary were lamenting how fat she was at a size 12. That's basically the kind of culture in this book. And whenever like Manako Kaji is written about in the papers, it's always talked about how she's kind of this man-eater that has like lured men and they've become her victims even though she's really plump and chubby and not classically attractive. Manako Kaji is a super interesting character. She's like very unlikable but also very self-assured, and she talks to Dika about cooking, butter specifically. Butter's brought up in every single chapter. There are references to butter being like blood, but also really in-depth descriptions of food. For example, like freshly cooked rice with butter and soy sauce being a classic, really tasty dish. Manako Kaji gives Dika kind of homework of to go and eat this certain kind of food or cook this certain kind of food, and it changes Dika's attitude towards food quite a lot. She starts to gain weight. People treat her differently because of that, and they get concerned about how sucked into Manaka Kaji's life she's getting. So all of these themes were super interesting. I ate so much butter while I read this book. I got really into having like butter and cheese on toast and like buttered rice and things like that. Thank you, book. Didn't really help my diet, which I suppose is kind of the point of the book. And I thought the character and themes were quite interesting. I thought it was an interesting glimpse at Japanese culture around food and about weight. However, after being intrigued at the beginning of the novel, I kind of felt like I got everything it was trying to say, and then the rest of the novel just really dragged on and on. And I think I ended up rating it like 2 stars, 2.5 stars, just because it really didn't have to be that long. I really feel like the book lost its way. I think it really could have been a short, snappy, short literary fiction novel, and it would have been much better pacing wise. And it probably would have had the same impact that it ended up having in the end. I think because it lost me, it actually ended up losing the impact that it would have had if it had been shorter. But there we go. I had absolutely right instincts to do this as an audiobook instead of reading it physically. I think if I'd read this physically, I would have been put in such a slump. After that was done, I was quite relieved that it was over, to be honest. I went on a bit of a Madeline Miller binge. So I listened to Song of Achilles and Circe by Madeline Miller, and I thought both were really excellent. I was kind of moving house during Circe, so I really fell out of the loop of listening to it. I remember listening to it like as I did all the painting in this office and in the bedroom, so that's quite nice associated memories. But because I was so busy, I got out of the flow with it a little bit. Song of Achilles I enjoyed a lot more, probably because I was in a lot more of a flow, but I also just found the love story between Patroclus and Achilles really compelling, really tragic, obviously. I didn't really know the full story of the Iliad or the Odyssey going in, although I knew kind of tangentially a lot about them. I studied classics in high school, but I don't have a like really in-depth memory of the classics. And to be honest, I didn't even read those ones. I read like Antigone and Medea. So I really enjoyed going down the rabbit hole of Greek poetry. I think these were really great to listen to as audiobooks as well. The narrator was really good and they were a little bit out of my comfort zone, so I think reading them physically might have been more difficult for me. But I'm really glad I did. I feel like I got a good grasp of the Odyssey and the Iliad based on reading them, even though they are obviously an adaptation and like modernized. Even this level of knowledge of those works was quite useful for me later in the year when I went on to read Catabasis and then The Secret History. It meant that the Greeks and Greek tragedies were just a little bit more like in my consciousness, which was good. And I liked all of the magical, fantastical elements of both those stories as well. Speaking of fantasy, I then went on to listen to some of The Hobbit, which I've listened to like many, many times, so I don't know if I should even include it in this wrap up. There's multiple Hobbit audiobooks, but the one I like in particular is the one with the gold version of Smaug on the cover, and it's narrated by Martin Shaw. He has this really deep, bassy voice that is just so relaxing to listen to. I listened to the tapes so many times as a child, so it was nice to be able to download it as a digital audiobook. And this was the perfect, relaxing re listen. Around that time, I was moving house, especially on like moving day. I ended up so overstimulated, like unpacking, decorating, getting everything just right, walking around up and down stairs, carrying things, moving two households into one. Like I was just pushed to my physical and mental limits that day. And sometimes, like, doing that, it kind of overstimulates you to the point where you can't even sleep. Like, you're so exhausted, your body's so sore, and all your brain can do is be like, we need to put this here, we need to unpack this, blah, 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 do this, do this. Like, during that day, I barely sat down to have like a cup of tea and a tea break. I like couldn't sit still. I was totally hyper. I cleaned the place I was moving out of as well. So, like, really, I did everything that I needed to do in that one day. There was really not that much left to do after that. Like, I was really able to relax in the days that followed, thankfully. But this audiobook really helped slow me down, helped get me to sleep, because it was just so familiar and relaxing. I then started listening to this book, The Better Angels of Our Nature, which is massive, bigger than this looks because the text is so tiny and the pages are so thin. The audiobook is about 36 hours. And yes, I do have the physical copy and I've actually like physically read quite a lot of this. I've read the start of it. I've skipped forward to this section which is all about like psychology, the inner demons, like sadism, things like that. But I like came to accept that I would never just sit and read all of this in one sitting. It's going to take me years to finish this, so I thought, you know what, I'll get the audiobook, I'll listen through once, all of the way, and then bits that I remember, bits that I want to reread that are interesting, I can just like flick through the physical copy like a textbook. And I'm really glad that I did that because some parts of this audiobook were a bit slow. Really enjoyed the beginning, which is all about like ancient prehistory of humans, our evolution, cavemen, things like that. Talked about chimpanzees and things like that as well. The violence and innate aggression within those ancient societies. And then the book then takes you forward to like medieval, ancient Greece, ancient Rome, like basically through the eras and how violent those eras were and how it kind of reduces over time. Then we get into a bit more modern history, so we're getting into the world wars, Then we have a couple of chapters called The Long Peace and The New Peace, which follows after the Second World War, where we go through a period where we don't have any real major wars that involve all of the world's kind of superpowers. And those chapters, unfortunately, are what dragged for me. There's about 10 chapters in this book, even though it's so huge. So every chapter is about 4 or 5 hours each, maybe 6 hours of audiobook, which is basically a book on its own. So at this point in the long piece, I really needed a bit of a break from this, to be honest. This is when I listened to I Know What I Saw by Linda Godfrey. Now, I did a video about Linda Godfrey and Monsters Among Us around Halloween time. She's a journalist that does non-fiction books about monsters and things that people have witnessed. I Know What I Saw is quite broad. It covers quite a lot of phenomena, creatures, cryptids, monsters that people have seen. I think it even gets into like ghosts and more spiritual entities. And she shares these in quite a like scientific reporter-esque kind of way. She really does her research and talks about the history and the folklore, which I really appreciate. And yeah, it was a really good listen around that Halloween kind of time. Just not when you're like driving down a dark forest road at night time. That would give you the creeps. After that, I read Silver Elite because I just wanted some really easy fiction, and I was intrigued by Silver Elite because it's dystopian, it's romantic dystopian, which is similar to what I'm writing, and I was like, you know what? I need to follow the trends in my genre, even if I don't think I'm going to like it, just for research purposes. And I did a rant review on it a few weeks ago, which you can go and watch. So yeah, I ranted. There was quite a lot of things about the story I didn't like. However, it was fine. Some of it was entertaining enough. Don't know if I'm going to listen to the second one, but I might do if I get bored next year or if I find myself becoming curious. It's not too taxing, it's easy enough to listen to while driving around, so I might give it a chance. But I didn't like it so much that I'll be buying a physical copy and, getting it on release day or anything like that. It was fine. It was like junk food. It's trash, but sometimes it hits the spot. I hope no one ever describes my book that way. That is quite scathing, but that's just how I feel, unfortunately. And then once that was done, I went back to the Better Angels of Our Nature. This is when I kind of recalled that you could speed up audiobooks. You didn't have to read it on like times one speed. I don't like speeding things up. I don't like when things sound like they're on fast forward. But the narrator for this book was so slow that I put it on 1.2 speed, and it really just sounded completely normal, and like that was normal speed. So I listened to the second half at that speed, which I don't feel like it's cheating because it sounds normal. And that has sped things up a little bit more for me. But it's still taking like forever to finish. So I've not finished it yet. I'm probably going to finish it this week. I'm on the final chapter, which is all about the better angels of our nature, as the title says. So I think it's going to be about altruism, compassion, and all of the things that kind of help us to moderate violence. And I really enjoyed the last chapter, all about inner demons, which I mentioned earlier. But it really went into like Stanford Prison Experiment, Milgram Experiment. Social psychology research shows just how we are able to commit evil acts sometimes when the stars kind of align in that way. He also went into talking about like sadism, revenge, predation, and even things like ideology, and how people will kind of lie and acquiesce to the group, kind of because they're just looking for a peaceful life and they don't want to stand out. For example, in experiments where there is smoke pouring out of a door and you've got your participant sitting in the waiting room and then a bunch of actors, the participant doesn't know that they're actors. When they don't react to the smoke, the person that's the participant will also not react to the smoke. They'll be like, oh, everyone else seems fine. Everyone else is relaxed, so I'm sure it's fine, even though there's like a very obvious issue and there might be a fire. It defies all logic, but that is how people behave. And we can end up with like false consensus. Like if you've got a similar scenario where you've got a participant and a bunch of actors, and all of the actors say something preposterous, like 2 plus 2 equals 5, and they're all really strongly in agreement with that, the participant will just go along with that, even though that's complete bullshit, and they know it's complete bullshit. because they want a peaceful life and they don't want to go against the grain. And they almost like gaslight themselves into being like, wait, is 2 plus 2 equals 5? What's wrong with me? It must be me if everyone else thinks this. And I think this explains so much about our psychology. It explains how people live in regimes where they have these totally crazy laws and rules, places like North Korea, and they go along with it because they don't want to be imprisoned for pointing out how crazy all of this is and how they might even start to believe it themselves. All of that stuff is super fascinating to me and basically comprises the inspiration of the book I'm writing. It's all stuff that I knew already, but it's good to have a refresher because it forms the backbone of the research of my novel. So that's a part of this chapter that I'll probably reread in physical form. And I was going to wait to film this till I'd like finished the book, seen the conclusions, seen the Better Angels chapter. But you know what? I feel like I got the point. I am going to finish it, but I'm sure you can also imagine what it says. And like the overall thesis statement of the book is that violence basically is in decline across the board. Wars are in decline. People like women, minorities, animals all have better rights than they used to. Yes, there are psychological mechanisms in place that kind of drive us to commit evil acts, but there are also better angels that drive us to be heroes and be compassionate and help each other. So, the overall message is that we can be hopeful about the trajectory of our lives on this planet. That being said, let's call it a day, shall we? I've done a lot of batch filming in this t shirt with my day old makeup. Next few videos, I'm also in this t shirt, by the way. I'm afraid this is just how it's going to be. Let me know what audiobooks you've been listening to recently. If you've listened to any of these or read them, let me know what you thought of the books. And if you have any recommendations for audiobooks that are particularly good with good narrators, let me know in the comments. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye!